This is the rear boot lid actuator when it's out of the car. I've removed it because it's going to be much simpler to explain and show you how to pull things apart, etc. with it out of the car rather than being installed. The way this works, the bit that holds onto the boot lid is this one here. So it's got a latch in there. So when it gets pushed down, it holds that in place. There's a cable here that runs down to this motor assembly, which is the actuator. This has a little motor inside, so when that spins, it pulls on the little latch there, which in turn releases the mechanism there. Electrical connectors, there's power for the motor down here, as well as a micro switch which tells it whether or not the thing is fully engaged or not. To disconnect things, the electrical connectors, this will be pressed into the body underneath the lock, and there'll be an electrical plug that slots into that. You can just pull out that Christmas tree plug and then just it's a single push on a tab there to disconnect that. This one over here, it's just two buttons, one on each side to pull, and that just comes off really easily. To remove the locking part here, there are just those two screws, and this is where the adjustment is done. So you would tighten that down when you are putting the lid on, if it's, for example, a new one. See if it's in the right spot, loosen those and move those as required. If you are removing this, I would suggest just putting some marks of where it was originally installed if you're putting back the original one into it. But those two screws can just come out and then that thing just comes straight off. To disconnect the cable is really simple. Just press on that little tab there and this thing just pops straight off. There's the end of the cable there that just slots into there. And that's the thing that you pull on that to release it. The micro switch, and the way this works, there's a little like a cam lobe there which will rotate around and press on the arm of the micro switch. To remove that, push this way, and then there's just a little tab in there. Just press that gently and that'll just pop straight out, and there's your micro switch. Interestingly, that's not sold separately, it's only sold with that, which is a bit of a pain. And then with this assembly here, if we want to disassemble this, there is a single nut which sits over the top of that. There are two studs that it sits on which come out of the frame. It's just a single nut that comes off, and this will slide straight off. You'll have the cable here. This runs around to the emergency release, so this runs around underneath a few foam bits, and it goes into a hole where this plunger, this little plug would be, and that goes into the right rear wheel well, just behind the trim there. So if you can't get into the boot, you can remove that trim, grab hold of that. And you need a lot of force to pull on this because it goes via a bunch of metal bits, and the amount of force that's required, because you're sort of turning over the motor here, is a fair bit to pull on that and release that if you need to. But to disassemble all of this, because you might need to replace this if it's failed, because this is sold separately by Porsche, we need to do is go the other side here, just a turn or two of the screws there. That'll just slide straight off, and then once we've done that, this thing here, there's just a couple little barbs there. You can just push on those, that'll rotate out, and then it'll just go through that slot there. And that all just comes out. And then to disconnect the cable assembly from here, you're just going to rotate that down like that until it gets to that point there where we can turn it at 90 degrees, and then that just pops straight out. To install is obviously the reverse of all of that. You can put that together like that. The way this thing attaches, it's designed so that at the end there's this little round bit that sort of clips into place. So you push it in like that, and then that pushes into there, press the tab on the other side, and that'll wiggle into place. And then once you actually pull on the cable, it pulls it out of that so it's loose again. But that is just for installation. Installation of the micro switch, just push it down there and just clip it into place. And once that's all together, that goes on. All of these connections take 10 Newton meters. The latching mechanism, the way this works, This thing here is actually the end of a big spring, so that sort of just bounces up and down, and so it holds it nicely in place and doesn't allow it to rattle once it's locked down, but also makes it spring up when you release it. And so all we do is simulating putting the boot lid down, is push that down, and down the bottom there, that'll just latch into place. And now that's being held nicely by that spring, and to release it, if I just simulate pulling that cable, it's just going to do that and release that and allow that to pop straight out. To remove the front lock assembly, first thing you need to do is remove the trim that sits around here. I'll put a link in the description of a video of how to do that. Now, I've removed the bumper at the moment. At the front you don't need to do that, but the bumper would be sitting and it's screwed into those three spots there. So all of this would be open as soon as you remove that piece at the front. And then what you need to do is just pull out the seal, just sort of pull that to the inside, grab hold of the inside bit of the liner and put that in. I've just put a bit of timber in there just to keep that open to give me access to the screws. And there are two screws that look like that on the inside there. Prior to removing those, I would mark the position of the lock. The adjustments for where the lid goes to is by using this, but I've marked that just to show where it needs to go back to. They have Loctite on them, so when you install those 10 Newton meters, make sure you put a bit of Loctite on those. There's an electrical connection here. You just lift that tab up and it just pulls straight off there. In addition to that, there is a micro switch electrical connection which goes down in underneath here. And the way you remove that is by disconnecting the micro switch itself. And the way we do that, first thing you want to do, this is the emergency cable release which goes to the left wheel well. It's going to be through that hole. There's a lug on the end of that. You can just pull that out like that. And I'm just going to lift this up and out. Now the first thing I need to do is just release the electrical cable here from this clip. You can either open the clip here or just pull it out of the Christmas tree plug. It's probably easiest just to pull it out of the Christmas tree plug. And then this is the micro switch here, and you'll have a look at it once we pull it out. Get your finger on the other side and sort of push it. These are two lugs here that sort of slot in here, and there's a little clip that's holding it into place. So I'm going to push on this side of it here in this direction. So it's all nice and loose. Just gently push in there and push it rearwards. And that's just going to pop out like that. And now that stays with the car. This is the micro switch here, which tells you if the piece from the hood is latched in here or not. Interestingly, these show a closed circuit now. So when it's not activated, it's closed, and as soon as I press that, it opens the circuit. So an open circuit tells you this thing, the bit from the hood is in here. And what that means is if you just disconnect this, and you need to remove the bumper to get your hands in underneath here to get rid of this, but if you remove the micro switch, it tells you that the hood is completely closed, even though it might be open. What's also interesting is that these aren't replaceable as a separate item. They come with the whole locking mechanism, the motor here that makes everything work to open it. That is a separate part, but the micro switch isn't. So for example, if you had one of these fail on the front, what you could do, because it's exactly the same part as the rear micro switch, you could just swap the two, because clearly I'd want to know that the front one is closed more than the rear one if you didn't want to have to buy a whole new unit. The way the front lock is all put together, there can be different versions depending on if you've just got this cable release which goes to the left front wheel well for emergency release, or if you've got another handle in the front boot. But either way, the way this is disconnected, on the other side here, press that button there, that just rotates out, and then that cable, which is going to slot into there, just pops off. When you are installing these, that little knob at the end, it pushes into the end and clips into place, and it's just temporarily there just for install, and then you push that down there like that, and then just wiggle that in place as you press that button, and then that's installed. When you pull it, now it's just going to pop out of that little clip. To disconnect the motor drive, which is the thing that opens it. It's got a T20. Just loosen these. They don't have to be removed. That just slots straight out like that. And then once, because this thing can sort of slide up and down, all you want to do is push it to the end there, push it out of there, and then just pop that out, and then that'll just rotate out. If you need to, for whatever reason, remove this little cable here, that just rotates, it goes in a little hole, and it just rotates out. And that's what that thing looks like, and you can just slot that back in again as required. For this one here, that's obviously the thing at the front there, so that would be sitting in there, and you're just going to move that left or to the right to release that. But it's the locking mechanism down here that holds everything in place. This is just part of a big spring, that thing there, which holds it in place. It's exactly the same as the rear. And then it springs it up when you release it. But when you push this down, as you're putting the boot lid down, it's going to latch that into place like that. Now that's locked. And to release, we're going to do exactly the same thing as we would for either pulling on that cable there or rotating this thing around, which is what that lug did. And then that'll just pop that open straight away. With the emergency cable release at the back, it runs from the motor here underneath this lug around here, and it normally runs all the way up here and then vertically straight down through a hole there. There's a grommet that it goes through. And the amount of force that you need to put on this to make it actuate is huge, to the point where I had to do this when I first had the car because I didn't have any power on it. It actually bends the panel down here. Now I've taped that up where that was, but holy smoke, I had to get vice grips onto it and pull it as hard as I could to make that work. So I'm going to reroute it to a position where it doesn't need as much force to pull it, and a position where it's a little bit more convenient for me to use if I need to. So what I've done is I've rerouted it. It still goes underneath there and around that piece of metal, but instead of doing a right angle turn there and a right angle turn there against these metal bits, which is clearly going to be pretty hard for it, it just goes straight down through a plastic grommet, which is a plug there. I've just put a little slit in that so it can just go straight down, and I'll show you where that is on the other side and where it goes to. So the plug that came out of that hole there is that one. They're easy to just pull out and then reinstall. There's that slit that I put in the middle of it. The plug that was already on there, which is the one that goes in that hole, it had a little finer piece that sort of really seals it down the bottom here, so I've chopped that off. And that now seems to sort of just push nicely and snug into that. So that'll be pushed in from the underside. This will be pushed in from the top. Hopefully that will seal it nicely. The slit there I'll orientate so it's going towards where I'm going to pull it from. Also, where I route this thing, I'm going to put it underneath there, that little lug, which looks like it's designed for that, because if it's not on there, it pulls this thing sideways a little bit and it's really hard to pull, whereas if it's like that, it seems to pull much more easily. So it's going to route like that. So with the rear bumper removed, which is pretty simple, that's where that plug comes out there. So you just pull it out from this side, and I've rerouted it to the other side. So this is the end of the cable there. Normally it would sit in underneath there, so if you just remove that little nut and pull that down and then just route it through under there, and that's not going to go anywhere. This is actually funny, a little slot in there where it's not going to come out of, and that just seems to sit there really nicely. So what I'm going to do is make a little tool that just slots over the top of those and grab it and just pull that really easily. So there's the tool that I've made. It's just a piece of aluminium that I've cut a little slot in. It's maybe, I don't know, 1.5 mm, which is going to have that cable slot through, and the lug on the end will just jam in there, and I can just grab my fingers around there and give it a bit of a pull. Let's see how it goes. Yeah, that is miles easier. Maybe 10% of the force required from when I had to pull it down with from the original position. To reroute the front cable, I'm just going to leave it in its existing position through here, but instead of running down behind the liner in here and behind this piece of foam, I'll just run it over the top of the radiator, so it just lives there. And I would just have it poking out of a small hole in the wheel liner there. It's not going to be visible from outside. You'd only know it was there if you knew about it. And then that's just going to give me easier access to that. And that requires very little force at all. So this is where I have put the hole on the inside. It's about 2 inches above the center of the fan outlet on the inside here. It's a 4mm hole because I think this thing is 3mm, and that seems to fit through there nicely, but to the point where if I push it, I really sort of got to push it hard to get it through, because I would leave it like that, obviously, so it doesn't touch the wheel. Pretty easy to work out where you want to drill that hole when you look in from this side with the light removed, but the thing to be careful of is you've got this electrical harness here, which is the one that goes to the bumper for the lights, etc. Make sure that it's not so high that it's going to impinge on that. I'm not sure if you can see the cable in there, that's sitting about a centimetre or two below that.